What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another breakdown here on Beyond the Box Score, where we dig deeper than the surface, look past the common narratives, and try to understand the matchups underneath the numbers. Every slate has a few games that slip under the radar, but that doesn't mean the edges disappear. In fact, sometimes those early tip-offs and smaller conference games are where the sharpest value sits. And on a college basketball Tuesday loaded with teams trying to define their identity heading into December, we've got a handful of matchups that deserve real attention. Now, as always, before we dive deep, it's worth reminding everyone that supporting the channel keeps these daily breakdowns coming. Less than 25% of you watching are actually subscribed. If you find value in the analysis, if you enjoy the picks, and if you want to help the channel grow toward that 2,000 goal, right now sitting at 1185, hit that subscribe button. It takes 1 second and helps in a huge way. So let's start with this early showdown between UT Martin and Charleston Southern, a game that may not be the headliner of the night but absolutely brings betting angles worth breaking down. UT Martin enters this matchup at 5-2, and that record isn't just the result of fluff wins. They're coming off a decisive 75-50 home victory over Subdivision Brussia, and even though that opponent won't raise anyone's eyebrows, the Skyhawks have already proven something this season. They can go on the road and pick up legitimate wins. Victories over UNLV and Bradley, both true road games, show that this team can handle travel, tempo changes, and hostile environments. Bradley in particular has been one of the more consistent mid-major programs over the last decade, while UNLV, despite being banged up early, is still a high-major roster with size and athleticism. Meanwhile, Charleston Southern sits at 5-4 after falling 74-62 to South Carolina, and that loss drops them to 0-2 this year against teams ranked inside the KenPom Top 100. They've handled weaker competition well enough, but when they've stepped up in class, the results haven't followed. This matchup starts to unfold when you compare strengths and weaknesses on both sides. UT Martin clearly has the offensive advantage, especially when it comes to getting to the foul line. They are third nationally in free throw rate, which shows how often they physically impose themselves to generate contact. The problem is that they simply haven't converted those trips at an efficient level, shooting just 63.2% from the free throw line, bottom 25 in the country. That inefficiency becomes the biggest hesitation point with backing them in spots like this. However, when you consider that Charleston Southern isn't particularly strong at limiting free throws, they rank 191st in free throw shot rate allowed. UT Martin's ability to attack should still put constant pressure on the Buccaneers' defense. Charleston Southern doesn't punish teams much at the line either. They shoot only about 3% better than UT Martin, which matters late in games but isn't enough to create a decisive advantage. And while UT Martin struggles with discipline defensively, ranking bottom 20 in free throw rate allowed, Charleston Southern's offensive profile doesn't suggest that they're equipped to exploit that. Their scoring is heavily tilted toward the perimeter. They exist almost entirely through the three-point line, sitting top 25 in three-point shot rate and top 5 nationally in three-point dependency. Over 40% of their offense runs through that perimeter action. That would be more concerning for UT Martin if not for the Skyhawks being top 60 in three-point defense. When a team relies overwhelmingly on one dimension, and their opponent happens to be very good at shutting down that dimension, the matchup begins to tilt. Charleston Southern barely scores inside. Only 40.7% of their points come from two-point range, and they generate less than 15% of their production at the foul line. Both marks rank inside the bottom 30 nationally. So if UT Martin removes the three, Charleston Southern simply doesn't have meaningful backup scoring options. Meanwhile, UT Martin is a top 75 team in both three-point and two-point shooting themselves. Yes, they turn the ball over far too often. ranking third worst in the country in turnover percentage offensively, but Charleston Southern is literally dead last in forcing turnovers on defense. When a weakness meets an even worse weakness on the other side, it neutralizes the concern. And because of all these intersecting advantages, UT Martin has the clearer path to controlling pace, shot quality, and eventual scoreboard separation. The pick here is UT Martin laying the points. But the slate doesn't stop there. Let's jump into another early island game, Army vs. George Washington, tipping at 11 a.m. Eastern from Crystal Arena. Not the flashiest matchup on paper, but these are exactly the spots where bettors love to dig in, especially when the metrics offer clarity. George Washington comes in at 6-2 after a narrow 96-95 loss to Murray State on a neutral floor, while Army sits at 3-6, though they've picked up back-to-back wins including an 81-78 overtime victory over Manhattan. But beyond those recent wins, Army's broader season profile reveals significant issues, particularly when stepping up in competition. The Black Knights were demolished by Duke 114-59, and that wasn't their only lopsided loss. Harvard came into West Point and won 75-52, and several other games saw Army lose contact by significant margins. This is a team that has struggled with pace, defensive execution, and simply finding consistent shot creation. Meanwhile, George Washington looks like one of the stronger mid-major units through the first month. Their Cayman Islands tournament run showcased their ability to play competitively against quality opponents. They beat Middle Tennessee by double digits and held their own against Murray State. Their offense ranks top 30 nationally in efficiency, and they combine elite shooting from both 2-point and 3-point range. Defensively, they aren't elite, but against teams with limited shot-making ability, like Army, they don't need to be. Army's defensive metrics paint a difficult picture. They allow a 59.2% opponent 2-point percentage, ranking near the bottom of Division I, and they do not force turnovers. Their only offensive strength is free throw shooting at 74.6%, which is solid, but irrelevant when you are consistently losing the battle in shot quality and interior defense. Ironically, despite being one of the highest three-point attempt teams in the nation, 4th in three-point shot rate, 16th in point dependency from deep, they're shooting a poor 29.3% from the arc. And now they face a George Washington defense ranked top 60 in defending the three. That's a terrible combination for an underdog. George Washington has repeatedly hammered bad teams this season, winning by 20, 40, 23, and 37 against sub-200 KenPom opponents. Even though this is their first true road game, the matchup advantages are overwhelming. Duke beat Army by 55. Harvard beat them by 23. Laying 20 with George Washington is still the right side. Next up, the ACC-SEC Challenge matchup between Duke and Florida, one of the premier games on the slate. Duke sits at 8-0 after defeating Arkansas 80-71, while Florida enters off a 90-78 win over Providence. The storyline here is simple. Florida is the defending national champion, but they haven't secured a ranked win yet this season, and this trip to Cameron Indoor is their first true road game. That's a tough initiation, especially given Duke's elite defensive profile. Florida brought in high-profile transfers, Boogie Flynn from Arkansas, Zaven Lee from Princeton, and they've got plenty of size with Alex Condon, Thomas Hawa, and Ruben Chinelu. But this team hasn't reached the offensive efficiency levels they had during last year's national title run. They're shooting only 27.7% from three this season, a significant drop from last year's 35.6%. That's especially problematic given their three-point attempt volume, ranking 106th nationally in three-point shot rate. They shoot almost 57% inside the arc and 72% at the line, but those strengths get neutralized against Duke, who ranks top 20 in defending the three, top 5 in defending the two, and top 20 in limiting free throws. Duke has both the personnel and the scheme to take away every major Florida scoring avenue. On the other side, Duke takes care of the ball extremely well and forces turnovers at a high rate. Florida ranks 254th nationally in offensive turnover percentage and just 303rd in turnovers forced defensively. That is a nightmare combination when you walk into Cameron Indoor. Florida also struggles defensively with discipline, ranking 274th in free throw rate allowed, while Duke sits top 75 in getting to the line. Add in star-level early production from Cameron Boozer, plus key contributions from Caleb Foster, Isaiah Evans, and Patrick Namba, and Duke's offensive efficiency, 5th nationally, begins to overwhelm the matchup. They rank 3rd in two-point shooting, top 50 in three-point shot rate, and fire at a 37% clip from three. With so many structural advantages, laying the 8.5 points with Duke is the call. Now let's break down Wake Forest vs Oklahoma, another ACC SEC Challenge matchup. Wake Forest enters fresh off an 86-73 home win over Northeastern, while Oklahoma comes in after a gritty 75-74 road-adjacent win over Marquette. The Sooners opened the year 5-2, but 3 of those wins came against teams ranked outside the KenPom top 325, and all at home. They also beat 290th ranked Oral Roberts. So the Marquette win matters. It showed Oklahoma can step up in competition, and they will need that confidence with upcoming tests against Wake Forest, Arizona State, and Oklahoma State. Wake Forest is 5-0 at home this season, but they haven't hosted a KenPom top 150 opponent yet. Their season could look very different if a few possessions went differently. They nearly beat both Michigan and Texas Tech. Offensively, they are one of the more balanced teams in the country, 50% of their points from two-point range, 31% from three, and 19% from the foul line. They aren't over-reliant on any one scoring method, which helps prevent matchup exploitations. Oklahoma absolutely has strength in its shot creation and efficiency from inside and at the line. But they rely heavily on the three. 35.1% of their points come from deep, top 75 in three-point attempt rate, yet they only shoot 34.5% from the perimeter. Wake Forest ranks top 50 in defending the arc, which directly disrupts Oklahoma's scoring structure. Oklahoma's strengths come in taking care of the basketball, defending the two, and doing so without fouling. When you look at Wake Forest, what strikes me immediately is the balance in their offensive game. This isn't a team that leans heavily on one particular style or type of scoring, they spread it out across the board. About half of their points come from two-point range, 31% come from beyond the arc, and roughly 19% come from the free throw line. That kind of distribution makes them tough to predict, but also tough to defend because you can't just key in on one facet of their offense. They're solid on the glass, but Oklahoma presents a unique challenge. The Sooners have a strong two-point defense and don't give up many free throws, which could limit some of Wake Forest's more efficient scoring avenues. The tricky part here is that Wake Forest isn't a team that fires a ton of threes, so they can't simply exploit perimeter weaknesses. When I compare these two teams side by side, it's almost like one of those Spider-Man memes. There's really not much to separate them. Oklahoma does a better job of protecting the basketball, while Wake Forest excels at forcing turnovers. Both teams are strong on the boards, making for what looks like another tight contest. If you dig into the numbers, Wake Forest's 3 games against top 100 teams have each been decided by just 1 point, highlighting their ability to compete in close games but also their tendency to be involved in nail-biters. Oklahoma shows a similar pattern. They edged Marquette by a single point and fell to Nebraska by just 6 on a neutral floor. All signs point to another highly competitive matchup, and for me, that gives Oklahoma an edge on the spread. I'm backing the Sooners at plus 4.5 here. It's going to be a fascinating test for both squads, and this one could really tell us a lot about where each team stands this season. So, Oklahoma plus 4.5 is my pick here. Shifting gears to the ACC SEC Challenge, Tennessee travels to take on Syracuse, and this one comes with an interesting set of narratives. Syracuse is coming off a brutal 95-64 loss to Iowa State, which wrapped up their run in the Players Era Festival, while Tennessee fell 81-76 to Kansas to close out that same event. Tennessee, however, had gone undefeated in the first 2 rounds of the tournament, which included a signature win over Houston. This is a team that, early in the season, was absolutely dominant over opponents. Syracuse, on the other hand, had their moments, including an overtime win against Houston, but then they appeared to hit a wall against Kansas and had nothing left for Iowa State. Strength of schedule is an important factor here, and while Syracuse has 3 top-tier matchups under their belt, the rest of their games have been against less competitive teams like Binghamton, Delaware State, Drexel, and Monmouth. That tells you a lot about their profile. They can dominate weaker opponents, but once the competition ramps up, they struggle to maintain effectiveness. Tennessee, entering their first true road game, represents a serious challenge for the Orange. Syracuse has been extremely poor from the foul line this season, hitting just 57.1%, and they shoot only 29.3% from 3. Yes, they're strong inside the arc, shooting 57.4% on 2-pointers, but Tennessee has a top 22-point defense and ranks among the top 15 in adjusted defensive efficiency. On top of that, Tennessee doesn't give up easy free throws, and when you combine that with Syracuse's inability to capitalize from the line, it's a recipe for a deficit that's hard to overcome. Tennessee is elite on the offensive boards, ranking 2nd in the country, while Syracuse sits 251st in defensive rebounding. When you factor in rebounding, free throw efficiency, and overall defensive prowess, the Vols have a clear edge. I'm confident laying the points with Tennessee here. They're simply the better, more well-rounded team in this matchup. Next up, we have Cal hosting Utah, which is shaping up as another compelling battle. Cal comes into this matchup at 6-1, riding a 3-game winning streak following an 80-72 victory over UCLA. Utah is 6-2, having just edged out Ole Miss 75-74 on a neutral court. Both teams are taking on their first true road challenges, but Cal's been particularly impressive. Their only loss this season was a narrow 3-point defeat at Kansas State, and they've been solid across the board, good from 3, strong in 2-point shooting, and efficient at the line. Defensively, Cal can do a bit of everything, protecting the paint, defending the perimeter, and forcing turnovers. Utah is balanced offensively, but they're not elite in any one area, and they don't tend to create many turnovers. Cal, on the other hand, is efficient with the basketball, makes a lot of shots from deep, and executes effectively in high-pressure scenarios. Their shooting splits are strong. Top 53 in 3-point accuracy at 38%, top 75 in 2-point percentage, and 74.5% from the foul line. All indicators point to Cal having the advantages they need in this game. Road trips are historically difficult for Utah, especially in hostile environments, while Cal thrives at home. I see Cal getting the job done comfortably here, likely winning by double digits, around 11 or 12 points. Lay the points with the Golden Bears in this one. Looking at Florida State versus Georgia in another ACC SEC Challenge matchup, Georgia enters as a 7-1 team after a 123-81 rout of Tennessee Tech, while Florida State comes in at 5-2, most recently suffering a 95-59 loss on a neutral floor against Texas A&M. Georgia has been dominant offensively, capable of putting up big numbers, and while they've had a few close calls, like a neutral site win over Xavier that required a late 3, they've generally proven their capability against quality opponents. Florida State, meanwhile, is still a team in development under Luke Locks and has yet to demonstrate consistency in ACC play. When analyzing these squads, both are similar on paper in terms of shooting and two-point defense, but Georgia separates itself at the free throw line. They are top 100 in free throw point dependency, converting 77.6% from the line, which ranks in the top 40 nationally. In contrast, Florida State struggles both to get to the line and to convert when they do. Georgia also has the edge on the boards and protects the basketball more effectively, which is key in close contests. Even in a true road environment in Tallahassee, Georgia is the team I trust to execute. My pick here is Georgia on the money line. Kansas versus UConn at Allen Fieldhouse is another intriguing showdown. Kansas comes off an 81-76 win over Tennessee in their last Players Era Festival matchup, while UConn is coming in off a 74-61 victory over Illinois in a semi-home environment at Madison Square Garden. UConn has shown promise under Dan Hurley with a solid starting lineup featuring Silas DeMurray, Terrace Reed, Alex Carabin, and Malachi Smith, making them dangerous opponents. However, Kansas enjoys a significant home court advantage in Allen Fieldhouse, which historically is not easy to overcome. This is Kansas's first true home game against a top-tier opponent this season, and despite some absences, like Darren Peterson's hamstring issue, the Jayhawks are battle-tested and capable of rising to the occasion. UConn has struggled in step-up scenarios, losing to Arizona at home despite wins over semi-home teams like BYU and Illinois. Kansas has consistently performed well in high-pressure environments at home, and I believe that edge will be decisive in this matchup. The pick here is Kansas plus the 2. Finally, we have Kentucky versus North Carolina at Rupp Arena, a marquee ACC-SEC challenge contest. North Carolina enters at 6-1, fresh off a 74-58 neutral loss to Michigan State, while Kentucky is 5-2, having recently dominated Tennessee Tech 104-54. Kentucky has struggled against top competition on the road or neutral sites but will benefit from Rupp Arena's electric home atmosphere. On the defensive end, the Wildcats are stronger than North Carolina, particularly in the open floor, perimeter defense, and rebounding. Both teams limit free throws effectively and defend well inside the arc, but Kentucky has the offensive edge, shooting 62.3% on two-pointers and showing better free throw efficiency overall. With a slightly more experienced squad and home court in their favor, Kentucky is the team I trust to come out on top. Lay the points with the Wildcats here. That wraps up my free picks for this slate of games. Every matchup comes down to execution, fundamentals, and capitalizing on advantages like free throws, rebounding, and home court. Make sure to drop your thoughts in the comment section. Who are you backing in these contests? And as always, for more daily breakdowns, expert analysis, and high-level betting insights, make sure to subscribe to Beyond the Box Score. We break down every slate with a critical eye so you can stay ahead of the action. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.